It is really puzzling to me that having just buried one monster, the Soviet Union, another remarkably similar one, the European Union, is being built. Exactly what is the European Union? Perhaps by examining the Soviet version we can get the answer. The Soviet Union was governed by 15 unelected people who appointed each other and who were not accountable to anyone. The European Union is governed by 24 people who appoint each other, meet in secret, and are not accountable to anyone, and whom we cannot sack. One might say that the EU has an elected parliament. Well, the Soviet Union had a parliament of a sort too, the Supreme Soviet, which just rubber-stamped the Politburo decisions, pretty much like the European Parliament does, where speaking time in the chamber is limited within each group and often amounts to 1 minute per speaker. In the EU, there are hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats with their huge salaries, their staff, servants, bonuses and privileges, their lifelong immunity from prosecution, which is simply shuffled from one position to another, no matter what they do or fail to do. Is this not exactly like the Soviet regime? The Soviet Union was created by coercion and very often with a military occupation. The European Union is being created admittedly not by armed force, but by coercion and economic bullying. In order to continue to exist, the Soviet Union spread itself further and further. The moment it stopped spreading, it started collapsing. And I suspect the same is true of the European Union. We were told that the purpose of the Soviet Union was to create a new historic entity, the Soviet people, and that we must forget our nationalities, our ethnic traditions and customs. The same seems to be true of the European Union. They don't want you to be British or French, they want you all to be a new historic entity, European, to suppress all your national feelings and live as a multinational community. After 73 years, the same system in the Soviet Union resulted in more ethnic conflict than anywhere in the world. In the Soviet Union, one of the grand purposes was the destruction of the nation state. And that's exactly what we observe in Europe today. Brussels intends to absorb nation states so that they should cease to exist. Corruption was built into the Soviet system from top down, and so it is in the EU. The same endemic corruption activity that we saw in the old Soviet Union has flourished in the EU. Those who oppose or expose it are silenced or punished. Nothing changes. In the Soviet Union, we had a gulag. I think we have a gulag in the European Union also. An intellectual gulag known as political correctness. When anyone tries to speak their mind on questions of race or gender, or if their views differ from those approved, they will be ostracized. This is the beginning of the gulag, the beginning of your loss of freedom. In the Soviet Union, they told us we needed a federal state to avoid war. In the European Union, they are telling you exactly the same thing. In short, the same ideology underpins both systems. The EU is an old Soviet model presented in Western guise. But again, like the Soviet Union, the European Union has within itself the seeds of its own demise. Unfortunately, when it collapses, and it will leave immense destruction behind, and we will be left with huge economic and ethnic problems. The old Soviet system was incapable of reform, so is the European Union. But there is an alternative to being ruled by those 24 self-appointed officials in Brussels. It is called independence. You don't have to accept what they have planned for you. After all, you have never been asked if you wanted to join. I have lived in your future, and it didn't work.
President, Mr Barroso says, I think my team is of high quality. Well, let's conduct a human audit. Now, I'm mindful that audits aren't very popular in the European Commission, and that auditors, if they do their job properly, get fired, but nonetheless, here goes. From France, we have Mr Jacques Barrot. He'll take on transport. In 2000, he received an 8-month suspended jail sentence for his involvement in an embezzlement case and was banned from holding public office for 2 years. From Hungary, we have Mr Kovács. He'll take on taxation. For many years a communist apparatchik, a friend of Mr Kadar, the dictator there, and an outspoken opponent of the values that we hold dear in the West. His new empire will produce taxation policy, and he'll look after the customs union from Cork across to Vilnius. Are the EPP and British Conservatives really going to vote for that? Yes. From Estonia, we have Mr Kallas. For 20 years, a Soviet party apparatchik, until his newly acquired taste for capitalism got him into some trouble. Though, to be fair, he was acquitted of abuse and fraud, but convicted for providing false information, and he's going to be in charge of the anti-fraud drive. I mean, you couldn't make it up. From the UK, we've got Peter Mandelson. He'll take on the trade portfolio. He, of course, twice was removed from the British government, yet, to be fair, he's one of the more competent ones. From the Netherlands, we've got Nelly Kroes. She'll take on competition. She's accused of lying to the European Parliament. Now, these may only be allegations, but they're made by Mr Van Buitenen, and I think should be listened to. Ask yourself a question. Would you buy a used car from this Commission? I mean, the answer simply must be no. But even if they were competent, even if this was a high-quality Commission, and sorry, Mr Barroso, but I don't think it is, even if it was a high-quality Commission, we would still vote no on the political principle that it's the Commission that is the guardian of the treaties, that it's the Commission that is the motor for integration, that it's the Commission that initiates the legislation that is damaging our businesses across Europe so badly. It is the Commission that is the embodiment of all that is worst in this European Union. It is the Commission that is the government of Europe and is not directly accountable to anybody. And please, when you vote, take note that 20 of these commissioners have already said that they intend to attempt to implement the Constitution even before it's been ratified by Member States' governments. In the face of such breathtaking arrogance, nobody in the Independence and Democracy Group will vote for this Commission. Thank you. What the European Parliament is engaged in here today with this debate and subsequent vote is nothing less than a massive exercise in deceit. A pack of lies are being told, and they're being told because you do not want the peoples of Europe to have the referendums that you promised them. It is the imposition of the will of the political class upon the citizens. We all know the truth. The Lisbon Treaty is the same as the EU Constitution. Exactly the same number of new competences. Exactly the same number of surrenders of veto. It is virtually identical in every regard. And it is constitutional because it gives this European Union a full legal personality, but worse still, it gives it the ability to amend itself in the future without having to refer to more intergovernmental conferences. It gives the EU the ability to legislate over literally every single aspect of our lives. I'm told, though, I shouldn't worry because the flag and the anthem have been dropped. Well, pull the other one. There's a great big flag at the front there. It's nonsense. It's all part of the lie. The truth is that you are too chicken to have a referendum. You don't want to hear the voice of the people, and now you resort to totalitarian means to get this treaty through. We heard Danny Cohn-Bendit say that those that oppose this treaty are mentally ill. We heard Mr Schulz say that those of us that objected to the sheer dishonesty of this project were behaving like Nazis back in the 1930s. Well, I think the ordinary, decent citizens of Europe will work out for themselves who the extremists are. And I must say, I wish the people of Ireland, I wish those that believe in democracy, every success in a couple of months' time, and I hope they send a large, resounding no, and I hope the voice of the peoples of Europe will be heard, not that of just you, the political class. And you may be complacent today, but you are increasingly being held in contempt.
Sarkozy's mini-treaty will now be around 3,000 pages instead of the 560 pages in the rejected constitution. The majority has the right to endorse the treaty, but you have no right to refuse a normal parliamentary scrutiny of this Lisbon Treaty. I have asked more than 700 serious questions on the interpretation of the different articles. You don't know the answers. You approve secrecy instead of transparency. You approve a reduction of parliamentary democracy instead of insisting on this Parliament's right to represent our voters, scrutinise on behalf of our voters, question the executive on behalf of the 500,000 citizens we represent. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, it's evening. It's been a very long day. We've been protesting in this Parliament, as you know, for months against the Lisbon Treaty, the Constitution, being pushed through without the referendums that previously people were promised. Well, it all came to a head today, because today was the day we actually debated the treaty and voted on the treaty. And it'll be no surprise to you that a very massive majority of this European Parliament voted to approve the treaty.
Vote, the vote is open. Has everyone voted? The vote is closed. 499 against, that's rejected.
We of course protested against this, and the theme for the day was that they were too chicken to hold a referendum. So in the chamber, the UKIP MEPs all wore these t-shirts saying too chicken for a referendum, and outside we had some staff who were also protesting. And at one point during the protest, the staff were being surrounded by security guards and press cameras, and I was asked to come out and see what was going on. And I went out, and yeah, it was getting a bit heated, it was getting a bit aggressive.
Yes.
But if I was to, say, be demonstrating in favour of the Constitution, I'd be in the bloody chamber and applauded. But why are the rules applied differently to us?
Wear a chicken costume anywhere in the EU anymore.
No one's been arrested.
Maybe it's in the treaty.
No.
We don't have
Not yet. They will be.
If you're agreeing, you can protest. Everybody has to sign it without.
You can protest on any issue you like in this Parliament, and that's fine. You can wear death masks and protest against nuclear energy. All of that's fine. But if you criticise the European Union and want referendums in member states on this treaty, they will fine you, they will arrest you, they will do God knows what.
And in the middle of all of this, one of the veteran correspondents who's been here for 20 years, a man by the name of Jim Gibbons, who does clips and outtakes for the ITN network across the country, interviewed me and asked me what was going on, and I said that the treaty was going through and that they were beginning to behave in a totalitarian manner, that we've been accused of being mentally ill, we've been accused of behaving like Nazis, and this from people who call us the extremists. Well, that was the interview, and you would have thought that was fine. As I turned my heels and walked away, the head of the European Parliament's audiovisual service turned to this veteran journalist and said, "I don't want you to use that clip. Parliament services, meaning the cameraman, are not here to record dissent. It was a deliberate attempt to censor what was put out from this place. Now, fortunately, a correspondent, a senior correspondent from the BBC was close at hand, and she said, well, if that's how they're going to behave, if they're going to regulate our input, the BBC will withdraw from the European Parliament. Well, since that time, there's been a climb down, and the audiovisual unit have apologised and said they simply overreacted in the heat of the
Do what you like, but if you criticise the European Union, and in particular, if you criticise them for breaking their promises not to put this constitutional treaty to a referendum, you get treated badly. These people are being carted off. We've got members in there who are going to be tomorrow fined and suspended from the chamber. There's no opposition allowed. Frankly, they're using totalitarian tactics.
I noticed that many of them were absent from the debate for long periods because they were outside the chamber, dressed as chickens. I think that is very symbolic. They are chicken because they chickened out of the debate here, because they are afraid of the verdict of this democratic debate.
But I will tell you this, from what I've seen in this place over the course of the last few months, they are becoming totalitarian in their instincts. They cannot abide, they cannot bear opposition of any kind. It looks like we're going to be denied a referendum, I'm afraid, on this constitutional treaty, which means what we've got to do as a party is to get ourselves ready for the European elections in June next year, which may be the only opportunity we ever get to send a message.
European leaders this week are to hold a summit that could lead to an anti-American European superstate. Unelected European elites want European nations to hand over what's left of their sovereignty to the European Union. Those elites want the European Union to become a superstate that would challenge U.S. global leadership. Kitty Pilgrim reports.
European leaders are gathering and conspiring to form a power bloc to counter the United States, a European superstate set up by a European treaty. But the leaders of Europe are doing it quietly, without putting it up for a public vote. The leaders of France and Germany are pushing hard to get the deal sealed by the end of the week, when the 27 European countries meet.
We still have some serious problems to solve before the Council, and an agreement will be possible if people are ready to compromise.
Some say this attempt to counter U.S. dominance in world affairs is dangerous.
The United States must not underestimate how far the elite-driven European Union has set itself up to be a counterweight to the United States. The French minister himself came out and said, America is so powerful, they're a hyperpuissance, they're a hyperpower. We need something to balance them on the world stage.
2 years ago, the European Constitution was ratified by more than half the countries, but defeated by the public in no votes in a French and Dutch referendum. Britain was also against it. But now European governments are playing word games by calling it a European treaty and not a European constitution, so they don't have to put it up for public vote. Adding to the intrigue, there are rumors of a secret deal between Prime Minister Blair and French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who met privately at a French restaurant last month. Leading to speculation, the French president offered the post of European president to Blair in exchange for quelling any opposition to the deal from the British public. Now, Europe on the surface looks more friendly to the United States. The new leaders, Angela Merkel in Germany, Nicolas Sarkozy in France. But the subtext of this European treaty is clear. European leaders want to set their own agenda apart from American policy. Lou?
11:30 the Prime Ministers will sign a final treaty none of them have read. They sign a bundle of amendments they cannot even understand. Yesterday the Danish Parliament refused a referendum on a treaty they have not read. They breach the Danish constitution and may be brought for court to have a referendum. Don't read, sign is a cynical moral. All negotiations in the IGC and the linguistic lawyers group have been kept absolutely secret towards many members in this Parliament. First, they undo 2 referendums rejecting the Constitution. Then they negotiate in secret and keep the content under a new name. The Lisbon Treaty will dissolve the existing EU, establish a new state with joint citizenship, legal personality and all tools of nation states. Most laws will be adopted by civil servants in secret. Democratic deficit will grow. My group proposed to cancel the signature until you have finally read the final text. Thank you, President.
Ich möchte als Fraktionsvorsitzender eine Sache diesem Hohen Haus zur Kenntnis bringen. Es ist nicht üblich, aus der Konferenz der Präsidenten zu berichten. Aber Sie sollten sehr wohl wissen, meine Damen und Herren, Kolleginnen und Kollegen, dass der einzige Fraktionsvorsitzende, der in der Konferenz der Präsidenten darum gebeten hat, eingeladen zu werden, um an der feierlichen Unterzeichnung des Vertrages in Lissabon teilnehmen zu dürfen, Herr Bonde war. Ich glaube, das Hohe Haus sollte das wissen. Kein anderer Fraktionsvorsitzender hat darum gebeten. Herr Bonde, der hier so rumschreit, wollte unbedingt dabei sein, wenn es um die Unterzeichnung des Vertrages geht. Also, ich denke, das ist einer der Doppelstandards, mit dem wir hier leben müssen. Und eine andere Bemerkung, die ich machen möchte, ist die: Ich habe als Schüler in einem deutschen Gymnasium gelernt, dass im Reichstag der Weimarer Republik es eine Strategie gab, den politischen Gegner niederzuschreien, und zwar chorweise. Die Fraktion, die das dort eingeführt hat, war die Fraktion von Adolf Hitler. Heute habe ich mich daran erinnert gefühlt. Vielen Dank.
This House and shouting down representatives of Parliament, Commission and Council during the signing ceremony was intolerable and must not be tolerated. It brings the worst of the football stadium into Europe's highest chamber and recalls the actions of the communists in the Russian Diet and the National Socialists in the German Reichstag. My formal request, Madam President, is this. My group demands that in future the Presidency use the powers granted to it under our rules of procedure to evict from the chamber members behaving in that fashion.
Aux collègues, ne dramatisez pas trop. S'il y a 50 fous dans une salle, il y en a 700 qui sont cons, et ne faites pas une histoire d'État parce qu'il y a 50 débiles mentaux qui ont dérangé ce qui s'est passé tout à l'heure. Calmons-nous. Calmons-nous et Graham, ne demandons pas la sortie physique. Je crois qu'un Parlement libre est un Parlement qui supporte des fous, même s'ils sont désagréables.
I took part in a peaceful manifestation against a celebration of a charter which is part of a constitution where I cannot even get the consolidated texts and see the relevance and the meaning. And you cannot as well. What you are going to sign tomorrow is a treaty none of you have read simply because it's not possible to read it. You conquer our voting time to celebrate a victory over democracy, and therefore I will not attack my colleagues. But I have to say to Mr. Schulz, I did not take part in crying. I understand it entirely, but we have in Denmark a different tradition. So I was there with my T-shirt calling for a referendum, and I think all of us should call for a referendum. This is the democracy norm you are defending. Thank you.
President, mention your speech in which you talked about that took place in Strasbourg in December. And since that time, under Rule 147 of our revered Rules of Procedure, you have called before you 13 members of this Parliament to face disciplinary action. And it seems to me that this has been done on a pretty arbitrary basis. One of the ones that you called, Cathy Sinnott from our group, I doubt has ever shouted at anybody in her life. Another one of the members that you called to appear before the headmaster's study, an Austrian member, was actually in Frankfurt on the day, so he must have one hell of a voice, mustn't he? And I ask, why only 13? There were about 80 of us involved in these so-called disturbances. In fact, you named me yourself in the Conference of Presidents as being one of the causes of the trouble. So why am I not being punished? I'm Spartacus.
Be that the reason you've acted in this arbitrary fashion, tearing up the rule of law, is because you are taking out on us the surrogate contempt you feel for the national electorates who keep voting no on the Lisbon Treaty whenever they're given the opportunity. If I'm wrong, prove me wrong by holding the referendums that you used to support when you thought you could win them. Put the Treaty of Lisbon to the people. Pactio Olicipiensis Sensendae of Rule 19, which puts this House in plain violation of its own regulations. We have now departed from the rule of law and given arbitrary power to the chair to tear up our rule book and proceed as he sees fit. This is plainly illegal under our own rules. This chamber may be sovereign, but it must nonetheless follow its own rules. This interpretation by the Constitutional Affairs Committee is going to be contested today. It may come before this House in a vote. If we vote in favour collectively, we are voting to abandon the rules under which we proceed. I would almost be tempted to compare it to the Ermächtigungsgesetz of 1933, but I think that would be disproportionate and perhaps a little rude to our President, who is a committed Democrat and a decent man. Let me instead then quote the grandfather of British resistance to totalitarianism, Edmund Burke. They must be worse than blind who cannot see with
to call this a debate, because the Minister didn't tell us any of the substance of the negotiations. But of course there is no debate, is there? No debate in the national parliaments, no informed opinion in the press, no debate at all. And why? Because this whole treaty is being put together in secret. And that is being done because you don't want to involve the citizens of Europe. You're fearful that the more they find out about your grandiose plans, the more likely they are to vote no. And what's worse still is the downright dishonesty with which this whole process is being pursued. For Angela Merkel, in a letter, to talk about the proposal, to use different terminology without changing the legal substance, I mean, it's Alice through the looking glass stuff, isn't it? It's the twisting of language. It is the deliberate attempt to stop there being free and fair referendums in European countries. It's your plan to act like a bulldozer, just to sweep aside the French referendum result, the Dutch referendum result, to pursue your political goals without taking the people with you. Well, I've no doubt you think that you're going to get away with it. But if you're proud of your European project, if you're true Democrats, then you join me in the call for let the people decide their own future, don't foist it upon them. Join me in the call for let the people decide their own future, don't foist it upon them. For let the people decide their own future, don't foist it.
Conspiracy or cozy talking shop? The Bilderberg Group is meeting in South Germany this week, at least according to the Financial Times, which says a group of powerful men and women will debate the future of the world. The paper says the steering committee of Bilderberg includes Deutsche Bank boss Josef Ackermann, Nokia CEO Jorma Ollila, Daimler Chrysler's Jürgen Schrempp, and outgoing World Bank President James Wolfensohn. I asked John Ronson, who has written about Bilderberg, what it really is.
Bilderberg is a meeting of powerful centrist industrialists and politicians. They always meet in secret once a year in a five-star hotel with golfing facilities, and they've taken on the image for conspiracy theorists of the fabled shadowy cabal that secretly rules the world.
Are they?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they're
a bunch of powerful people. They meet in secret. They say we meet in private, which isn't quite the same thing, is it?
It's not quite the same thing. I do think that by and large, many members of the Bilderberg Group actually see themselves in much the same way as the conspiracy theorists see them, as this shadowy cabal out to, if not to rule the world, but to influence world events.
What would they see as their purpose then? I mean, presumably it's a good get-together of powerful people. They don't often get a chance to meet away from the glare of the press. One could understand why they might want to have a private chat.
Yeah, and that's certainly got something to do with it. They see themselves as wise globalist centrists. They were set up post the Second World War by people like Dennis Healey, David Rockefeller and various others. And
there's a degree of idealism there, isn't there? They didn't want to go to war again. I mean...
Oh, absolutely.
Is that a sinister conspiracy?
Well, I mean, it depends what side of the political spectrum you sit on. And you know, many of the anti-Bilderberg conspiracists are right-wingers who see themselves as twigs in a tidal wave of globalization. They see themselves as nationalists. And they think the idea of a world government, which is what Bilderberg is into by and large, the idea of a one-world community, a new world order. You know, they see that as
They see themselves as a government as opposed to a group of world leaders or people with influence at a global level who are talking about global issues, do they?
They see themselves as headhunters. They'll get an up-and-coming politician who they think may be president or prime minister one day, and as globalist industrialist leaders who believe that politics shouldn't be in the hands of the politicians, they try and influence them with wise words in the corridors outside the sessions.
Should they be risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist? But it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
It's a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause.
It's the true story of Europe. It's the story the politicians don't want you to hear, because it shows how they've deceived us and betrayed our nation. Only in 1994 did Chancellor Kohl's foreign policy spokesman, speaking on behalf of the ruling party of Europe's dominant nation, Germany, clearly reveal the true plan. The plan is to create a federal European superstate. Into it will be merged up to 25 ancient European nations, including our own. This new country, called Europe, will have one parliament, one government, one court of justice, one currency, one flag, and one anthem. That has been the plan all along. But those who favoured it knew the people of Europe would never accept it. They would never willingly surrender their freedoms to become just a province in a vast European superstate. So what did the politicians do? They conspired to keep the truth from the people.
From 1973 onwards, the slow but consistent transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels through successive treaties our own politicians signed became known as the acquis communautaire. It was nicknamed the ratchet. For once powers had been given to Brussels by the member state, they could never be returned.
Initially I thought, like everybody else, that we had joined a common market, and what could be nicer and more friendly and sensible and economically wise to do. But since then, in 1975, when we had the vote to remain in that, so we were told, it's become one or two things further than just a common market. It then became, a few years later, a European economic community, then a European community. It's now the European Union, with all sorts of controls and restrictions, regulations, and we're fast approaching via this new constitution something that the French have already named potentially a United States of Europe. And I'm not at all sure that that's what I and many others voted to join back in 1975.
In black and white, the draft constitution wording confirms Brussels will exercise competence and primacy over member states' own laws. For the British, this will mean being stripped of any remaining independence, losing control over our foreign policy and armed forces, the handing over of our legal system and law enforcement to the European Union, the scrapping of the pound sterling to be replaced by the euro, the handing over of our remaining currency and gold reserves to the European Central Bank, and the total regulation of British domestic and international trade by the European Union.
For many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.
Rockefeller's role in the drive for an FTAA was a lot more central than he portrays. Rockefeller cultivated Latin American leaders who could be counted on to support such a proposal. Both the 1994 Miami Summit and the FTAA proposal were conceived and nurtured by a Rockefeller-created network. Prominent among the organizations sponsoring the Miami event were the Council of the Americas, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller, the Americas Society, chairman David Rockefeller, the Forum of the Americas, founder David Rockefeller, the Institute for International Economics, financial backer and board member David Rockefeller, the Trilateral Commission, founder and honorary chairman David Rockefeller. Rockefeller's influence also extends to the current administration. He was chairman emeritus of the CFR when Vice President Dick Cheney once served as a director, a relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Before that, Simon Cox presents Club Class.
Imagine a club where presidents, prime ministers and international bankers rub shoulders and where royalty's on hand to make sure everyone gets along, where the people running wars, the markets and Europe say what they never dare to in public. Welcome to the world of Bilderberg, the most exclusive and secretive club in the world. Bilderberg was set up to strengthen the troubled Atlantic Alliance. For 3 days, Europe and America's elite could meet and iron out any differences in private. Figures from the centre-left, like Gateskill, have always been a feature at Bilderberg, because big business and the Americans wanted to get them on their side. The conference papers show exactly what was discussed within the secret confines of Bilderberg. What's striking is the degree of consensus reached by those at the meeting on contentious topics like European integration. Here's another interesting, it's another paper from the person what's about the European Union. It's interesting here saying some sort of European Union has long been a utopian dream, but the conference was agreed that it is now a necessity of our times. Only in some form of union can the free nations of Europe achieve a moral and material strength capable of meeting any threat to their freedom. So this is 50 years ago saying we must have a European Union.
Yes. Again, reflecting the fact that many of the people involved in planning Bilderberg had also played leading roles in getting the European movement going in the late 1940s and early 50s, and the fact the Americans want it so much as well because they want a stronger Western Europe to resist possible Soviet aggression.